It's very kind, Vivian. Thank you so much. And thank you all for being here. You had a lot of choices this morning, and you chose to come here. And I appreciate that, and I acknowledge that. So hopefully you have some interest in what I'm going to be talking about here today. So as Vivian said, I spent close to 40 years at Disney, starting in animation. I was fortunate I got to learn from most of the artists that worked directly with Walt Disney. I never met Walt. He died when I was only 10 years old. But fortunately, I got all the information that from the designers and the animators that worked directly with him. And I learned quite a bit. That's why I did this drawing of me with Mickey, because I felt like when I left Disney, I had graduated. I learned all this stuff, but I learned a lot of it the hard way. Because most of what we did at Disney was prototype. You know, I was fortunate to be involved in a lot of firsts. You know, first cruise ships that Disney did, a lot of prototype work. In fact, all of our projects, when you think about it, are prototypical. And they're this kind of interesting blend of a lot of technology, but always driven by story, and story that you hopefully will believe will touch the guests in some way. But what I learned is because of this prototypical nature of the projects and this complex kind of balance between the story and technology, we didn't always hit the mark, and often we had to go back. And as I said here, as I'm calling my presentation, we had to fine-tune the magic. What I've showed here, there's two pictures. Both with Walt, because people forget Walt Disney was a real man. You know, the company has become kind of this thing that's bigger than he was, but he was a real man, and his genius was that ability to blend story and blend technology in a way that the guest or user, and through my presentation today, I'll be using both words. At Disney, we called them guests because we wanted everybody to feel like they were being treated special in a special way, and that's how you think about a guest. But it's the same. We use user or guest are interchangeable. So two attractions here. One's Pirates of the Caribbean, which is probably the quintessential Disney attraction in terms of it delivering a clear story, involving you in the story, getting you emotionally involved in it. There's humor, there's adventure in there. It ultimately created a whole series of movies. The ride came first, movies came second. And then the other attraction here was Small World, which was like the perfect blend of charm and art put together. So two good examples here of things that worked, and they didn't depend on intellectual property. Like so much of what I was involved with towards the end of my career at Disney and they're doing now is dependent on Star Wars or Pixar films, Marvel in a big way, where you use an existing intellectual property to drive the experience. But these were based on no intellectual property, but still delivered on that emotional connection that is so important in what we were trying to do. So today I'm going to use some case studies to explain what we thought the user guests wanted or how they would interact, respond was often off base. I'm going to talk a little bit about falling victim to the curse of knowledge. Ooh. And then what and how we learned from the user and the guest response and how we fixed it and what the bigger lesson was that we took out of it. And hopefully there'll be some big lessons for you, or little lessons, or medium-sized lessons that you can take with you today. So first, I'm going to start with the curse of knowledge. Okay, how many are aware of the curse of knowledge or have heard about it? Okay, good. If you haven't, look it up on Wikipedia, Google it, because it's important to know. There's a quote from, they believe it's from Mark Twain. He said, "It ain't what you don't know that gets you into trouble. It's what you know for sure that just ain't so." So in other words, the curse of knowledge is a cognitive bias that occurs when an individual communicating with other individuals unknowingly assumes that the others have the background to understand. Are we all thinking the same? And actually, I've heard this brought up in a few different ways through this conference, this idea that we all come in here and I say, big red dog. And that seems like everyone knows what a big red dog is, but some might be thinking about a cartoon red dog, or some might be thinking about a real Irish setter. There's this example here called the tap test, where you put two people across the table from each other, and you have one person say, I'm going to tap a song on the desk, and it's so simple, and everybody knows the song, so when I tap it, you're going to be able to guess what it is. And so in this case, I used the example of Happy Birthday to You. And everybody knows, Happy Birthday to you, but you're not singing it, you're just tapping it on the desk. And in these studies, they've shown that only about 20% of the time does the person across the table get it. But you're convinced. Everybody knows I'm tapping Happy Birthday to you. It's so simple. Why don't you know that? Because it's the curse of knowledge. So very important, because too often during what we were doing, we assumed we knew what we were doing, and we didn't. So a few case studies today. First one, this was a ride we did at Tokyo Disneyland based on the Pixar Monsters attraction. And we thought it was pretty simple. We wanted to have some level of interaction. You know, there was a trend, and there still is a trend in a lot of the rides where you just don't want guests to sit passively and watch the scenes as they go by, but interact in some way with it to hopefully connect them more with the experience. So in this regard, we were giving everybody a flashlight. And we had a lot of debate with our client. The park there in Tokyo is actually owned by Oriental Land Company. It's a licensing deal. And we kept telling them, if you give guests a device, you need to have some kind of game experience connected to it. And they said, no, you know what? It's going to be enough. So what we thought the user wanted or how they would interact. So we thought the guests would be satisfied to just discover the hiding characters with their flashlight. The lights were low, you went through and you used the flashlight to find the character. And there was no game implied. Second thing, we thought that the strength of the IP, the characters and the story that everyone knew from the films, was going to carry the experience. Well, what we learned. Guests didn't know what to do with the flashlight. What was the objective? What was the game? I mean, as soon as you give somebody this object, they want to know, well, what am I supposed to do with it? That's what this guy there is totally befuddled. And the second thing is, don't assume that just because a movie or a property is well known, that everyone will come, with this complete knowledge of it and have this emotional connection because of that. Because they don't. Or often IP fades, intellectual property or a project based on intellectual property. When the movie first comes out, everybody knows about it, they're familiar with it. Oh, I want to go see those characters. But 5 years, 10 years later, and when we build these attractions, they're there for decades. It's got to stand on its own. So how we fixed it and what bigger lesson did we learn? Well, we actually went back and we retooled the entire experience. We made it a defined game with a clear objective and a clear response. So we added little hard hats to all the characters, and you were told you had to, find the hard hats with your flashlight that had a special light color that was unique to yours, and you got points. It was a game. It was simple. It was easy to get. And it made the experience entertaining and understandable without having to have knowledge of the characters in the story. Start another case study. Okay, so this is similar. It was another game-like experience, but with a different dynamic and a different learning. So what we thought the users wanted and how they would interact and respond. So we did a couple different installations of this attraction, and again, it was a kind of a ride-through shooting gallery based on the Toy Story characters from Buzz Lightyear. So the original installation of this attraction had a fixed gun, a blaster. It was connected to the little ride vehicle. And it had one little dot that would allow you to target what you were going to shoot at. And we assumed guests could easily identify their target like a traditional shooting gallery. What we learned, well, unlike a static shooting gallery, the user's guests were in a moving ride vehicle, which added another dynamic to it, and it made it impossible to distinguish your hit, what I was pointing at, from the other players. So there was no clear cause and effect to identify the hit. Guests left frustrated and unsatisfied. So how did we fix it? We made the blaster free tethered. And then we did the second installation of the ride. We took the tethered gun off, and now you could hold it in your hand. So you had more freedom. And then we added a really strong laser beam so you could see exactly what you were pointing at that identified your target. But then the bigger thing that we did, I thought that really helped, we added haptics. There was, when you hit the target, the gun would vibrate and it would light up. So there was no doubt what you were pointing at, you would hit it, you'd get this cause and response. Made it much more satisfying. So what was the bigger lesson we learned? The video game generation brings their expectation to any perceived game-like experience. They want clear cause and effect and strong haptic responses. So don't assume a different format from a traditional video game, which these kids know it's got a distinct cause and effect that I'm playing with, and really define haptics. You can feel it. You're getting this immediate feedback. Just because we changed the format and turned it into a ride, they still brought that expectation with them. And yet another case study. But first, let's pause to enjoy a cute puppy photo. Okay? Did you enjoy it? Good. Let's move on. Okay, back to our case studies. Disney Cruise Lines. As Vivian mentioned, I was in charge of design for the two newest Disney ships, the Dream and the Fantasy. And we had a lot of innovations on there. One of the big things on cruise lines and cruise ships, if you've been on one, is the upper deck experience with slides and pools and places to hang out, and especially on the Disney cruise line. So after we did the first ship, we got feedback, what we thought the user guests wanted and how they would interact in response. Well, the guests said there wasn't enough shade and water play activity on the upper decks. We responded by adding dedicated shade areas for adults and dedicated water play areas for kids, because through some research and feedback from the guests, we heard that kids want to play and adults want to rest. What we learned. The guest user wanted shade and water play, but they wanted them as shared family activities and areas. We found that the adults were going and trying to play with the kids, and the kids were hanging around where the adults were trying to relax. So how did we fix it? We created new areas with shade and water play for the entire family. We still had segregated areas, but we said we know that we need to create these areas where the entire family, not specific to children or adults, could be together. And then we had areas that were previously segregated, like we had a couple slides that there was a kid's slide and an adult slide. And we said, nope, kids and adults can do them together, and they did, and they loved it. That's what this picture is here of the kids together. So, what bigger lesson learning did we gain? Really understand. It's not enough just to understand your user. You have to understand the user dynamic. In this case, we understood, kids will do this, adults will do this, but we didn't really understand the dynamic. Listen to your user, your guests, but be sure you know what they're really asking for, because at its core, the Disney audience is family, and they want to share as much of the experience together as possible. So yet another case study. Are you still with me? Okay. Okay, this was an interesting one. Sinbad's Storybook Adventure. This is at Tokyo Disney Sea, which is one of the most beautiful theme parks in the world, again, operated by the Japanese, who spent tons of money on it, and it really is, it's an amazing park. In fact, maybe they had too much money, and this is part of the problem with this attraction. What we thought the user wanted, how they would respond. We set out to create a new Disney classic. So I put the picture again of the Pirates of the Caribbean and Small World, because the thought here was we were going to combine the two most famous Disney attractions, Small World with all the cute little characters, and the stylized background, but then we were going to add the swashbuckling adventure story to it and visual aspect as well. So best of both of these attractions, right? What we learned, it was neither. Guests were confused. It wasn't swashbuckling enough like the Pirates of the Caribbean, and the sweetness and the charm just didn't come through. And guests came up. I mean, it was beautiful. Like I said, we spent so much money on this thing, and all the animatronics were great, and the sets were great, but people came off of it like, well, nothing, no connection with the experience. So how we fixed it? We focused on the sweet and charming. So we have two choices. We can either go back and make it more swashbuckling or make it sweet and charming. Now, in Japan, they love all things cute. It's just part of their culture. So we made the choice to make it sweet and charming. And then we added a sidekick character, this little tiger character. Much like, basing an attraction on like the Monsters ride or the Toy Story thing. Characters give the ride a little point of view, and it gives it some emotional connection, especially a cute character. Here you didn't have to know the character from a movie or whatever, because it was something that everybody had it was a familiar touch point. People have cats, people have dogs. It's almost like the pet. And we gave this Sinbad a little pet character to follow him around on the attraction. And then we composed a memorable song to create emotional connection. That was one thing from Small World, and if anyone's ever been on that attraction, any hands there? Yeah. It's a blessing and a curse. You come out singing that stupid song, it's a small world, it's like stuck in your head all day. But, having a sticky song, that connects you again to the experience in an emotional way. The song, and also like in a good movie, the music kind of tells you what the emotional temperature, the emotional feeling is supposed to be. As it gets romantic, the violins come in, or if it's an adventurous part, the drums come in, whatever. And so the music really helps to tell you how you're supposed to feel about the attraction. And in this case, we created a cute little song. In fact, we actually went and had Alan Menken, who did the music for Little Mermaid, come on and wrote the song for us. So what bigger lesson learning did we gain? No matter how well executed, without a single clear thematic focus and emotional hook, the guest user will leave unsatisfied, cold, and confused. So you need to find the emotional core of every experience and use whatever device necessary, cute characters, engaging theme song, to deeply connect your guest and your user. And now it's like one of the top rated attractions at the park. Oh! I went ahead. So, one final case study, but before finishing up, let's enjoy a photo of a yummy ice cream sundae. Yummy. Okay. Now, back to the case studies. All righty, let's finish up here with, these are a couple miniature golf courses we did at Walt Disney World. Are you guys familiar with miniature golf? It's where you do cute little icons and things, and you put the ball through. And the idea with miniature golf is that everybody from, a little kid like Ragnar's age almost to an adult can, or grandma and grandpa, we can all do this together and enjoy this experience. So what we thought the user guests wanted, or how they would interact and respond. Well, first we did some research. And research is good, and I believe in it to a degree. But again, there's that curse of knowledge comes into play, and research will tell you something. You think, oh, okay. In this case, they told us the guests wanted a high level of golf play challenge, because they went around and they looked at the competition in the marketplace. And they said, you know what? We need to create miniature golf that has more challenge for the guests. So we thought this high challenge element would differentiate this course from the others in the market. So one of the things we did were created more steepness to the holes. We had to hit it up hills, so we thought that would make it more challenging. Well, imagine if you're a little kid and you're trying to get it up that hill. All the kids were like whacking the ball so hard. Balls were flying everywhere. Nobody was getting a hole in one for sure. So, what we learned, the design proved difficult, like I said, especially for the younger guests. And the overall experience in the end was frustrating and unsatisfying. So how we fixed it? Well, we couldn't do a whole lot on that particular course, but we got a chance because we had to build a second one. And in the second one, when designing it, we reduced the difficulty of play because we really understood you need to level the playing field. And it became kind of this balance of finding enough challenge, but enough ease of play. And in fact, we even created many of the holes where you get a hole in one. A hole in one means when you hit it, you get the ball in on the first try. And if you're playing with a little 3 or 4-year-old and they get a hole in one, it's like, it's Christmas morning. Wow, look what I just got. I got my hole in one. So that proved to make a very, very satisfying experience. So what was the bigger lesson we learned? Know your audience. Once again, this is a little different from the dynamic of the audience. This was just clearly not really understanding that this family audience thing, again, hit us right in the face. Need an experience that leveled the playing field so that people of all ages could have a satisfying experience. So, what are the big takeaways? Thought I would sum them up here for you. First, don't depend on IP, intellectual property, stories, characters from movies to carry an experience. The core activity should be fun and entertainment without having to know the story and the characters. That was the big lesson on the Monsters ride. When creating a game experience, make sure it really is a game with clear objectives and positive feedback. Know your users' expectations and ask yourself if they are really being addressed. Don't think changing the format, a video game to a ride, will change the user's expectations. Guests come with an understanding of their world and how they interact with it, and if you change the format, it's not going to change the way they think about it. When designing for a group, make sure you understand their collective dynamic. Again, it's one thing to know the group, but when you put people together, there's an interesting dynamic. Listen to your users' wants, but be sure you understand what they're really asking for. Don't fall victim to the curse of knowledge. Experiences need a clear thematic focus, and this to me is a really big one. That was the big lesson and takeaway from that Sinbad ride. Find the emotional core of every experience and use whatever device necessary, like we did the cute character, the engaging theme song, to deeply connect your guest and your user. Know your audience, who are you designing for with the miniature golf course, and when designing for a broad spectrum of ages and ability, make sure the experiences works for and satisfies everybody. And finally, everybody loves puppies and ice cream sundaes. Okay, thank you very much.